Hello, everybody. My name's Jeff Granville, and I would like to thank you for joining us here on Harmonium for a live event on Stir. The previous recordings, Stir 1 and Stir 2, go along with our Harmonium breathing exercises that get you from a reactive state into a controlled state and into a coherence breathing state. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some more slides on the education of how we got into the STIR method. And then we're going to have a live exercise to demonstrate how it works when you perform STIR on yourself. And I would really like to add that it's a really important feature of the coherence breathing to be able to feel your pulse speed up when you breathe in your nose and feel your pulse slow down when you exhale out of your mouth. That is biophysical validation that you're in homeostasis, you're in balance in your body. And we don't want to try the STIR method on ourselves or on other people if we can't maintain that autonomic swing between fight and flight and rest and digest. And again, HeartMath Corporation, who is the world leader in hardware and software on heart intelligence and heart rate variability, they liken our autonomic swing and homeostasis to a tennis player waiting for a serve. You don't know which side it's going to go to, so you got to bounce back and forth. And that's what our autonomic nervous system does, so it can be ready to go to rest and digest or fight and flight. So that's a very important feature of how we're built. And with awareness and understanding, we can use that to our advantage to biohack our way into balance and homeostasis and hopefully stay there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the screen share. And we are going to take up where we left off last time. And again, this is the Harmonium page. STIR is Somatic Trauma Imprint Release. And it is brought to you by Harmonium, a wonderful new wellness platform. And we will go right into this slide. We're going to dive right into a very important topic from an amazing mentor and teacher of mine who has taught many people, many of the experts that are out there today have gleaned a lot of information from Candace B. Pert. She's a PhD who wrote the book, The Molecules of Emotion. And the picture shows that what comes in as wave, as a signal, actually turns into physical cells, molecules of emotion. And one of the favorite quotes is that every thought and emotion becomes the fabric of your being. And what that means is that when we have emotions in our body, we feel them as qualia, as sensations. And emotions are a unified call to respond or react to your environment. They align your entire being into a response or reaction to your physical world. And what happens is when we create emotions like fear, the molecules of adrenaline and cortisol actually bind in our cells and change our physical structure. So that is a very important takeaway from her book. And one of the things that I found fascinating was the study of the superior colliculus. And that is a fancy name for a region of the brain that is your higher consciousness that looks over all your surroundings, and it'll actually steer the photocells in your eyes to look a certain direction or away from another direction. So what it does is based on your worldview, that inner model that we talked about in the previous STIR 1 and STIR 2, that when we have a perception of our environment, it'll actually find things in your field view that match your worldview. So if you wake up and you think, I'm in a bad mood, the world's against me, That language and that emotion tells your superior colliculus to find things in your environment to support your worldview. So that's why if you wake up in a bad mood, you find 10 things will come up during the day to support. Yep, I knew it. The world was a mean place and a hateful place. So with awareness, understanding, and adjustment, we can use the superior colliculus to our advantage, and we can be in a good mood and look for good things, and then the universe will show us through our superior colliculus 10 or 20 things during the day to support that worldview. So it's within us to change our outlook and to change the world around us. The other part we talked about was the allostatic load, where the nucleus of Barrington, another fancy name for a brain region that decides, it's freezing cold, we're going to lose 2 fingers to frostbite instead of dying. Instead of they'd rather sacrifice 2 fingers than the entire living system. So when we're stuck in a situation that's unhealthy, something's got to give. The nucleus of Barrington will decide we will forego good health in the body because we have to run or fight. And the other takeaway was called the adaptive unconscious. And that is the part of us that we can adapt to our environment by changing our unconscious programs. It looks for things in our environment that we can change in order for it to match our worldview. So I won't go into too much detail about that, but the superior colliculus talks about cybernetics, and the original, like the Latin Greek term for that is the one who steers the ship. And if you think about a sailboat, which I grew up sailboat racing out in the Pacific Northwest, you have a skipper and then you have team members. And based on feedback loops from your other team members, you will make adjustments to steer the ship in the proper direction. So inside our body, our adaptive unconscious uses cybernetics and the feedback loops within our body to make decisions on a subconscious basis underneath our awareness. And that led me to coin the term the autonomic consciousness, because we have our conscious mind, which controls about 50 bits of information continually at our best. But the autonomic consciousness, our higher consciousness, processes 50 billion bits of information continually. So its bandwidth is huge, the huge potential. But what happens is when we get triggered by trauma or something in our environment, our autonomic consciousness closes off to focus on the danger. And when we become focused in left brain fight or flight, we aren't open to what the autonomic consciousness can tap into. And it's the autonomic consciousness that'll make the hair stand up on the back of your neck when someone's approaching you, because it is literally eyes in the back of your head. It's paying attention to your entire environment so that we can survive, thrive, and procreate. So the next slide is inspired by an amazing mentor of mine, James Oshman. He wrote the book Energy Medicine that has served as the gospel for energy medicine, energy work for decades. And one of the things that he talks about is fascia. Now, it's also called the living matrix. And within every cell of our body, there could be 2, 3, up to a dozen fibers of the living matrix that goes through every cell of our body. It's like a spider web that goes through every cell of our body and it communicates. It's made of collagen, which is a amino acid protein mix that is made of collagen and water. And as we all know, or we are being made aware of, water holds information and communicates information in our environment, in our body. And our emotions, like Candace Pert teaches, our molecules of emotion affect the, the structure and the communication in our living matrix. So a myofascial knot, like I talked about in the first stir one, is an emotional snapshot held in the tissue, the soma, that records the trauma from the level of consciousness that endured it. So a myofascial knot is like if you walked up to a spider web with a forked stick and you put it in the spider web and started to spin it, it would make a knot out of the spider web, but it would also pull in the boundaries. The perimeter would become tighter. Okay, so when we're in perfect posture, and in a completely relaxed and hydrated, nourished state of being, our fascia is evenly distributed in our body and has equal tension. And that leads to the term tensegrity. James Oshman teaches in his book, Energy Medicine, that when we are upright, we have equal tension in all our fascia. But just like the forked stick in the spider web, when we have a somatic trauma and it makes a myofascial knot, it pulls us into a posture that's unhealthy, like we go all the way into a protective mode or even the fetal position. And what that does is when it makes our structure bend down, bend forward, hunch over, it makes all of our other muscles in the back of our neck and back tighten up, just like a suspension bridge. If you loosen one cable, the other cable gets loose. If you tighten one, the rest of it gets tight. So tensegrity means tension integrity. That means you want to have equal distribution of tension through your body. So what happens when we're triggered in trauma most of the time, we will take a posture of protection and that becomes a set in our body. We'll hunch over, we will protect and guard, we're in fear of our environment or we're triggered, and that takes a set. So the muscles, like if you go to a massage therapist to relieve the tension in your neck and back, pay $150 an hour or whatever it is, and then it works for a day or two, and then our tension is right back. The reason for that is because of the myofascial knots. And I'll go over it. We have two in our chest and we have two inside of our hip bones. And those are the intersections for everything that goes through our arms and our legs. We'll go over that a little bit further, a little deeper as we go on further. So here we show the psoas muscles. And the psoas muscles are the only muscles in the entire body that connect your legs to your torso. So there's a very strong connection on the femur, and it goes up to L4, L3, L2, L1, and T12. So what happens when we are sitting at a desk all day long? When you're standing up straight, these muscles are stretched out and elongated and in the best form. But when we're triggered, we pull forward, just like it says, the body goes so as the emotions go. So if we're triggered or we're afraid or we're sad, we lay down, we get in the fetal position, and these muscles tighten up. And then when we go to stand, it's harder to stand back up again. So posturing is controlled by the psoas muscles and the emotions of our worldview, things in our worldview that our perception, like we talked about, the HPA axis, the hypothalamus is your perception of the environment, and it triggers the pituitary and the adrenals with these molecules of emotion that put us into a posture. So the way to undo that is with power posing. If you think of nature and two animals come together that are battling, they both pose and posture, and it spurs adrenaline to fight and to clash for superiority. So what we can do with that information, and we understand how it works, we can put our body in an open situation and it'll biohack those chemicals, those molecules of emotion that will increase our well-being and our attitude and our perspective and perception of life. So on the other side, we talked about tensegrity. If you look at the middle of the back right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the erector muscles, and they attach way down here at the tailbone and sternum, or tailbone in the sacral, and they go all the way up under here and attach to the base of the neck. And these muscles, the erector muscles, aptly named, keep us erect. So when the psoas is pulling us forward based on our emotion and our posturing, these erector muscles are trying to stand us up straight again. And what that does, it's like the tension bridge. If you tighten these cables get tight, trying to fight back. So it puts pressure on the system. And if you think about your shoulder and your hips, they're both ball socket joints. So when you have tension in the front and tension in the back, that jams your shoulder together and causes shoulder pain and deterioration. The same thing happens in the hip, which is also a ball socket joint, and it creates tension in the system and creates, that's why there's so many hip replacements and shoulder surgeries. And they call this biotensegrity. It happens automatically, whether we're aware of it or not. It happens underneath our conscious mind by the autonomic consciousness. And here we're looking at the four places I mentioned, right in the upper pec and between the hip bone and the pubic bone on each side are four myofascial spots that hold tension and trauma. And all of your somatic trauma, when we take an emotional snapshot, they're held in these four spots. So if you look at what happens in the body when these spots get tight, then everything, that's why we have sciatica problems, that's why we have hip problems, is because of this. This is the root cause for all discomfort and tension in your body. And I've added these slides back in. These were in the previous, in STIR 2. And I'm going to talk about these two slides between this and Joe Taylor. And if you remember, if you did watch, and if you don't, here it is. But when we're in guilt, shame, anger, fear, we're in the lower frequencies of consciousness. And if you were to go down to the level of fear and cut it in a cross section, then that is your autonomic conscious bandwidth. That is what you're looking at in your environment. You're focused on your environment. I just read today, and I'll add this, that when we breathe in and it triggers our sympathetic nervous system, our pupils get smaller. When we breathe out, they get bigger. So what happens when you breathe in and it triggers the sympathetic nervous system, your pupils get smaller to focus on an issue and a problem. And that's true with every cell in your body. They get tight. So what happens when you are triggered by a myofascial knot, a somatic trauma imprint, then your worldview is smaller and we react. That's the lens of consciousness. So when we're able to release our somatic trauma and we can go up into the higher levels of consciousness, if we're to bisect it in joy and peace, Then we have an open bandwidth of consciousness. And it literally, your conscious bandwidth is what allows light in to update the DNA in every cell of your body. That's what the 95% of your junk DNA is actually doing, is absorbing and emitting light to structure the cells. And when we're closed off in trauma, we don't let light in. And that is the background for the body armoring that I talked about. So we're going to go down and we're talking about Jill Bolte Taylor. And she wrote the book, The Whole Brain Living, and her famous TED Talk and book, My Stroke of Insight. She was a neurologist, as I explained before, that had a brain bleed, and it shut off her left brain of fight or flight, and it opened up her right brain, and she was all colors and energy. And she actually looked down and said, how am I going to fit in that little body? So what I'm going to do right now is stop screen sharing for just a second because I want the full visual on this. So if you take that cone of consciousness and you turn it on its side and you look at the center point right here, and everything on your left side is anger, fear, and angst, human windings, triggered fight or flight reactions. On the right side, your right brain is your connection to divinity. So it's like a sliding scale. If we're centered in a state of receivership, like I call the physiology of our divinity, you're centered right and left brain, you're in a coherent state, that's the physiology of our divinity, then you're open. You can look at a problem and be open to a solution. But when we're triggered in angst, it literally cuts off the blood flow to your right brain because our system works by impairing, impeding, inhibiting one side over the other. So we're in a natural open state, but when we're triggered in fight or flight based on a trauma, it closes off and takes us over into the left brain and down in that cone of anger, angst, guilt, reactiveness. So the particles in our body become more dense, like that stick in the spider web makes a knot. When that happens, when we have a trauma and we're triggered in that left brain small cone of consciousness, we're more particle than we are wave, and we're not open to divinity to come in with the answers. So that's a really important takeaway. I'm going to go back to screen share. I hope that's all good for everybody. So here we go. Okay, so a couple of the teachers that help us learn about how we create a state of being to be open. Michael Singer wrote an amazing book called The Untethered Soul. And he talks about a term called the lightness of being. And what he's talking about is that when we are in a triggered state, we are more dense. When we are in an open state, we're in a lighter set, a lighter state of being. We're open to divinity. And it's an important takeaway because we can be aware of this. If we open up our conscious mind with this awareness and we understand it, then we can use these techniques to open up and become a lighter being. And I don't mean you will weigh less pounds. I mean, it's the density of your tissue. So he also explains that the human windings, the angst, the worry, the anger, the unforgiven person creates these windings and makes us denser. And he calls those the tethers that bind us to the ground. We are not light and open and connected to divinity. So if you want to drill down and do some reading on this topic, this is a book recommendation that I have. And then this is the practice I use all the time. This is Ho'oponopono. It's the ancient Hawaiian practice, and their belief system is that the essence of everybody's soul is peace, joy, and love. And if you think about that, let's go back just for fun. Look at the top of here. Peace, joy, and love, right there. And love is not the top. Joy is above love. Then you have peace and then enlightenment. So one of the sayings I have is if you do everything with love, it'll bring you joy. And then you'll have peace in your life. And that's what enlightenment is. So let's go back. So Ho'oponopono, they have a saying that if the essence of every soul is peace, joy, and love, if you experience something in your world or from another human that's not peace, joy, and love, then it's not divinity. It is a human winding. It is a human trigger. And what they do is they have a mantra that they encounter that. They say, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And they're not just saying it to the other person. They're saying it to themselves and all of the collective consciousness. And what that does is it clears it for everybody. They have a saying that says, if your cup, your internal cup, is full of human windings, where's the room for divinity? Where's the room for inspiration? So what I teach, and I got a lot of this information from Joe Vitale's books, At Zero and Zero Limits. But what I teach is not just how to go from angst down to zero, but how to create from zero. Because if we're triggered in a reactive state, that's not where we want to create from. To get the outcome we desire, we want to be able to get to zero, have no trauma, no reactivity, and be at a state of zero, and then we can create with divine inspiration. So these are our breathing exercises. They are in harmonium. We're not going to go through them all right now, but if you're in a triggered state, you use the reset breathing. And once you do the reset breathing, you go to controlled breathing, where you take a nasal inhale for 5 seconds and oral exhale for 6, making the ah sound. You do that for 5 cycles. And then we go to the coherence breathing. But like I've said before, if you can grab your wrist and feel your pulse, you're ahead of a lot of people. If you can feel your pulse speed up when you breathe in your nose and slow down when you exhale out of your mouth, then you're biophysically validating homeostasis in your body. And if you can maintain that, then you can exercise the stir technique. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go off of screen share again. And I would like us to be able to sit together, and we're going to do a stir technique. And by demonstrating it today, I'm not going to claim that you try it once and all your trauma will be gone. This is something that can be done over and over, like the term I used before in Stir 2, titration. Take small bites and chew slowly. You're going to release trauma over time. Now, I've had people release trauma in the first few sessions, but what we're doing is we're hardwiring. We're using neuroplasticity to hardwire the state of coherence into our body. And there are 3 things required to release trauma. You have to be in a safe, supportive, and expansive environment. A safe environment in that it's not going to happen again, or at least not now. a supportive environment in that what comes out won't be used against you when you feel vulnerable. And an expansive environment means heart expansive, soul connected, grounded environment. That is the recipe for a stir release. So, what we do with the coherence breathing is that we get into that coherent state. We do it over and over again. Like I said, if you can devote 30 minutes a day to your wellness, do the 3-minute breathing exercises 10 times a day. That'll wire it in over your whole day and flip that ratio of awareness from 10 triggers of fight or flight into 10 triggers into homeostasis and balance. Okay. So when we breathe in for 5 heartbeats and we exhale for 6 heartbeats, we're biophysically validating, verifying homeostasis in the body. So once we can maintain that, then we can let go of our wrist and we can find the myofascial knots in our body. And this is an example of how I do it. I'll hold my arm up in the air and I'll put my middle finger, these 3 fingers together, but I'll put my middle finger just under the collarbone. Go right under your collarbone, over by your shoulder, and you'll find a divot, kind of a little low spot. And you want to get your middle finger in that, and then rub your index finger along the bottom of your collarbone, just nice and gentle. So you get your middle finger in the divot spot. Sometimes if you turn your head or move around, okay, and then you find your underneath your collarbone, you find that spot, you run your finger along the collarbone, and what you'll do is you'll find a spot that's kind of tight, a little sore. And if you watch Varushka, who's a coach on harmonium, and they practice tapping, emotional freedom technique, they call this the sore spot because everybody has them, one on each side. Okay, so if you find a spot that's kind of tender or a lump, right? You get on that spot and just kind of rub it lightly. Okay, and you're just going to make contact with it. You're bringing your conscious awareness to the trigger spot. You're letting it know that you're aware of it. It's aware of you too. And it knows that you're paying attention to it. So while you're breathing in for 5 seconds and exhaling for 6 seconds, because you won't be able to feel your heartbeat, you don't have it on your wrist, until you practice it enough, you'll actually feel it in your body without having to feel your pulse, because it hardwires it in. So while you're rubbing this spot, breathe in for 5 seconds in your nose and do a 6-second oral exhale. And then on 4, 5, and 6, put light pressure on that spot. Now, as we described in the previous episodes, when we inhale, we trigger the sympathetic nervous system and our heartbeat speeds up. When we oral exhale, it triggers the parasympathetic and our heartbeat slows down. So on 4, 5, and 6 of the exhale, you put light pressure on that. So when we touch our myofascial knot, our somatic trauma imprint, it triggers the sympathetic, but we're exhaling a parasympathetic physiological overlay. So what that means is that you trigger the sympathetic, but you are respirating, exhaling a parasympathetic overlay. So when you trigger it, your body is in homeostasis and parasympathetic, and it dissipates the charge and allows the trauma to be released, like unwinding that stick out of the spider web. And that's exactly how it works. So what you do on your own is that you find this spot and you do your coherence breathing over and over again, and you give it love. You breathe in your perfect design of the divine. You imagine yourself I had one care recipient who imagined herself sitting under the shade of a tree on a hot summer day, and she was completely healthy. And I showed up, and she got up and ran to me and gave me a hug. That was her ideal vision of her perfect health because she couldn't go outside and she couldn't run. She couldn't do any of these things, right? So you imagine, you breathe in. Inspiration is the breath that fills the soul. So when you breathe in, you're breathing in the perfect design. And when you exhale on 4, 5, and 6, and you put pressure on that myofascial knot, emotion will come up. The trigger will start to come out, and you will feel the emotion. Now, don't label it. You don't have to put words to it. Just be with it and feel it and let it go. Thank it for its service because it got you here, but then allow it to be reprogrammed by consciousness now in the moment, not the past, not the history. So when we do this, like what I recommend is like if you scan your body and you move around and you find like this last week, perfect example, I got a shoulder pain right here and I had no idea where it came from. I didn't hit it. I work hard, but there was a real bad pain right there. And then I think, well, what am I going through emotionally? What am I going through in my world? And there is something I'm going through. So this myofascial knot tightened up, which made all my back muscles and neck get tight, and it put pressure on my shoulder. So when we move around and we find pain, like when you do yoga, when you do stretching, you'll come up against something that's tight, and that's where you breathe through it. You want to, anywhere that you can feel pain is a spot that needs somatic trauma imprint release. Like you might have a pain here, but that's not the epicenter of the pain. The cause of the pain is this myofascial knot making everything else tight. So with this understanding, we can then adjust and work on the spot, and you'll have one on both sides. So practice finding it on both sides. And if you find a spot that's like a knot or tight, that's your spot. And we just breathe in our nose for 5 seconds or 5 heartbeats, preferably. And when we exhale and our heartbeat's slowing down, we press on it lightly, not hard. You don't have to give yourself a bruise, but you just press on it until you feel the pain a little bit. Like I got one right here, right now. I can feel it right there. And if I lightly breathe in and then exhale, 4, 5, 6. And an advanced version of this, we also do a pelvic clench, a Kegel on 4, 5, and 6, because that goes to the paraacquidal duct in your brain and releases serotonin and further calms your body. The slides, the breathing slides, and the harmonium go through this in detail. So those are your two myofascial knots around your heart. So when we have myofascial knots from trauma for heartache and angst and guilt and shame, we often don't get to speak our truth. So our throat chakra will be blocked and we won't be grounded in our environment. So then our intestines, our gut, our digestive system is cut off from all of our energy centers. And if we look back at STIR 2, we looked at the human circuit where consciousness flows through us from Father Sky to Mother Earth. And if there's a trauma knot, it's a distortion in that flow, and it has to work around it. So our goal is to remove these knots, remove anything that's going to impede the flow of consciousness through our body, and allow every cell in our body to be updated. Everything is in a coherent rhythm without isolations. So cancer is nothing but cells that have been cut off from the rest of the body. They're like a foreign invader, but they're actually our cells. They're just not in communication. So if we aren't in flow, areas can be cut off, and that's where illness starts. So this is going to reintegrate. We create a higher frequency in our higher consciousness states, and the frequency will either push out any low frequency or it'll entrain that frequency to the rest of our healthy body. So this is how we cure illness through stir. Okay, so in another event, I would love to have in-person events because as you see in my studio, there is the massage table and I do hands-on stir release on all 4 myofascial knots. And we have amazing results for releasing trauma and allowing consciousness to upgrade our cells. But I also want to take a minute to add something that I haven't added to any other presentation, is that this also works for physical injuries. So if you remember years ago, if you sprained your ankle, they would tell you to elevate it, ice it, and it would get swollen and purple, and you'd have to stay off of it, right? And if you stepped on it, it creates pain. Well, pain is nothing but a warning. It's a signal from your autonomic consciousness to stay away from that. And the swelling is like an internal cast to hold it from being twisted again. Okay. But if you remember, what was it, like 15, 20 years ago, they found out that like in a football game, you have a multi-million-dollar player, you've got a multi-million-dollar doctor. So the athlete injures themselves on the field and they come off the field and the doctor looks at it and says, "You're not damaged, it's just sprained." So they tape it up a little and say, "Walk it off." But you know what? That ankle doesn't swell up. That ankle doesn't bruise because you're paying attention, you're believing the doctor so that the pain is understood. You've got the signal, you've given it your awareness, and then it doesn't have to swell up. So if you have a pain in your body, like I did on my shoulder, I would just touch that spot. I don't do the trigger like I do, the somatic trauma imprint, but I'll by touching it, you're bringing your awareness to that spot. And you want to thank it. You want to say thank you. Pain is a messenger. We don't want to kill the messenger. Western medicine kills the messenger. You've got an internal problem. It gives you a painkiller to kill the pain. So what does the body do? It shouts even louder. It puts out more pain signals because you're not paying attention to the pain. You've killed the messenger. So the important takeaway here is I've had many people twist their ankle out on a hike. I used to do this with my kids years ago, that if you have a twisted ankle and you immediately put direct pressure on it, like you would a cut or a wound, you're bringing your collective attention to that spot. You breathe, like take a breath, relax, settle down. Those are ancient ways to look at how to treat a sprained ankle. Well, by bringing your conscious awareness to the pain, you're paying attention to that signal, the signal can diminish. Once your autonomic conscious knows that your conscious bandwidth of 80 or 50 bits a moment is going to focus on, okay, I'm going to be careful. Thank you for the message. The pain diminishes. I've got videos of McCoy 3 days after kidney transplant, walking down the hall with his IV pole, telling me that pain is just a messenger. And he had 0 opiates and was out of the hospital in 9 days. 0 painkillers, no epidural, out of the hospital in 9 days because of this knowledge at 8 years old. Okay, so this is capable to all of us. He's not a unicorn. I am not a healer. This is something innate to all of us, but we aren't aware of it. It's been hidden from us. Western medicine tells us you need opiates, you need anti-inflammatories, you need to miss work. Okay. I've even done it on cuts. If I cut myself at work, what do? You put direct pressure, right? If you've got an open wound, put direct pressure to save someone's life. Okay, that's not just a physical thing. That's also bringing your conscious awareness to that spot. It minimizes the pain. And instead of tons of blood flow, bringing all of the repair agents to, like the stem cells to recreate and to make a scar tissue, okay? It'll give just what it needs to repair it because the body heals by itself. We don't have to do anything or think about it in our conscious bandwidth. All we have to do is get out of the way. We don't want to hit it. That's why there's pain. So it'll remind us to be careful of it. Because if we leave it alone, it'll heal, right? But of course, if it's a big gaping wound, we need direct pressure, butterfly bandage, stitches. We bring in the medical when we need it, but not first and foremost. We bring our conscious awareness. So I've had cuts on my finger that I do that with, and I breathe through it, and I don't even have to put a band-aid on it. I work the rest of the day and even bump it, and it doesn't open back up again. Because if we are consciously aware and we give gratitude for our system for functioning, we can eliminate long-term injury and repair it in real short order. That's something we're capable of. So this is, again, the example how to transcend with awareness, understanding, and adjustment. So, we're coming close on time. Do we have any questions? Is there anything you would like to ask? That's okay. That's a lot to take in. And I would like everybody just to, you know, take this in. This recording will be posted. You can watch it again. You can reach out to me at jeff@mindfulpresence.org. You can reach me through messaging through Harmonium on our platform. I'd be happy to work with anybody directly. I offer free consultation to anybody on Harmonium. So if there's any questions that come up, you can reach out to me through Harmonium or to me directly through jeff@mindfulpresence.org, and we can continue this conversation. And I want you to look forward in the future to an advanced workshop where I demonstrate on a participant here on my table on how I work on all four spots. And we won't have slides, we won't have the educational. We're just going to do a participatory example of how a stir session works. And it would be my goal, my vision, to have group workshops where we meet in person and we can show like how a spouse can work with the other spouse or partner or friend, how we can do this on ourselves and for each other. It's not something proprietary. This is our innate wisdom. This is our universal God-given right, our innate ability to heal, and how we activate that. And like I said, our innate state of being is health. And only when it is impaired, inhibited by something in our surroundings or inside our being, like a trauma, that we don't heal, that sickness and illness takes hold. Okay? So just like a positive thought can inhibit negative thoughts, a positive way of being can inhibit the unhealthy way of being. That's how we heal. We recreate that in our environment with awareness, understanding, and adjustment. So I hope this hasn't been too much information. It's been fun for me to show up and go over this with you. And I would love to continue the conversation in private messaging and look forward to more sessions here on Harmonium. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. And I look forward to seeing you next time.